I stood frozen on the porch, the estate file still tucked under my arm, as my son beamed at the woman beside him and said loud enough for the whole brunch to hear, "She raised me better than my mother ever did." My mother, as if I were a role he recast, as if stretch marks, emergency room visits, late-night feedings, and mortgage payments were forgettable. No one looked at me, no one stopped him, so I didn't cry. I didn't plead. I went home, opened my will, and started erasing him from everything he assumed was his. Wait, before we go any further, I gotta ask, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The garden was dressed like a magazine spread, strings of warm Edison bulbs arched over long wooden tables, mason jars bursting with sunflowers and baby's breath, and trays of chilled mimosas drifting through the air like butterflies in the hands of hired servers. A jazz trio murmured near the hedges, their instruments soft enough not to compete with the laughter. Cameron stood near the head table, shirt sleeves rolled just enough to look effortless. 29 today, tall, tan, the kind of man who didn't just walk into a room, he landed in it. His friends crowded around him, raising their glasses in a mess of toasts. Sunlight slanted through the oaks, dappling the lawn with gold. Diane's glass tapped against her fork, polite, clear. The small clatter pulled everyone's eyes to her. "Can I steal him for a moment?" she said, smiling toward Cameron. He stepped beside her, always the favorite son, always the golden boy. Diane turned to the guests. "There's not much I can say that doesn't sound like a mother bragging," she began, laughter stirring politely. "But when your son grows up to be the kind of man people genuinely admire, you're allowed to brag a little. I'm proud of the man you've become, Cam." Her voice didn't quiver. It didn't have to. Every word felt like it was etched in stone. Cameron raised his own glass. "You raised me better than anyone ever could have," he said. Voice steady, smile warm. He wrapped an arm around her shoulders as they both took a sip. The crowd clapped. Glasses clinked. Someone made a joke about being next to get adopted by Diane, but not everyone laughed. Veronica sat 5 chairs down. Her floral dress, picked 3 times over this morning, suddenly felt too tight around the ribs. The champagne in her flute had gone flat. She stared not at Cameron, not at Diane, but at the space between them, at the mutual gaze that lasted just a second too long. Grace, sitting beside her, noticed the quiet storm rolling behind her friend's eyes. She leaned in, voice low. "You okay?" Veronica blinked once, her face smoothing into a neutral mask. "Of course," she replied. But Grace had seen it, the sliver of pain, the split-second flinch when Diane said proud, the flicker of something deeper than jealousy, older than heartbreak. The conversation drifted on without them. Someone proposed a toast to summer, another to Cameron's new promotion at the firm. The laughter around the table lifted again like a kite in wind. But Veronica stayed grounded, still, hollow. She finished her tea in a single sip, her pinky tense against the china. Then, placing her napkin neatly on the table, she stood. "I need to take a quick call," she said, to no one in particular. Grace turned slightly in her seat. "Want me to come with?" "No," Veronica said quickly. "It's just work." She stepped away from the table, heels silent against the grass. Her walk was measured, her posture perfect, but her jaw was clenched like a fist. Once she rounded the corner of the hedge wall and out of sight, the air around her changed. She inhaled like someone coming up for air. Her fingers trembled as she reached into her purse. No missed calls, no texts, no excuses. Still, she stared at the blank screen like it might answer something. Behind her, the music carried on. Cameron was laughing at something. That laugh, the one that filled every space, even the ones it didn't belong in. Veronica didn't smile. She stared down at the phone until her reflection in the screen warped into something unfamiliar. Then, slowly, she raised one finger. Not to tap a contact, not to dial a number. She pointed, back toward the garden, through the hedges, toward the table she had just left, at him. and whispered under her breath, "You don't get to walk away clean." The late afternoon light slanted sharper now, cutting, colder, as Veronica stepped into the foyer of her townhome. The garden brunch laughter still rang somewhere in her skull like an echo she hadn't invited in. She slipped off her heels with controlled grace, walked barefoot across the hardwood, and set her phone on the kitchen island face down. She didn't need it anymore today, not for what came next. Her steps grew slower as she approached the hall closet, the one with the upper shelf no one but her ever touched. It took a moment to drag the step stool from the laundry room, her movements methodical but tight with purpose. She climbed up, opened the box marked simply with her own initials, and pulled down a thick manila folder that hadn't seen daylight in years. The estate file was heavier than she remembered. The name tabbed at the top read Veronica A. Delaney, Last Will and Testament, executed 2015. She carried it to the dining table and sat down beneath the chandelier that hadn't been turned on in weeks. She opened the folder slowly, like cracking a long sealed vault. There it was, the notarized will, her original estate attorney's notes, addenda from years past, when things had still made sense. She scanned the typewritten lines, and her eyes halted where they always did. Sole beneficiary, Cameron Michael Rayner. Her stomach clenched at the name. He had been everything once, the godfather to her son, the shoulder she leaned on after the divorce, the man who moved into her world so easily, so gently, that she hadn't realized how deeply he'd buried himself until he was already inside her future. She flipped past the legal pages, past trust agreements and power of attorney forms, until the paperwork gave way to the personal archive she'd stashed there herself. Photographs spilled out onto the polished table, some glossy, some faded at the corners. Baby shoes hung from a hospital bracelet in one picture, nestled in a shadow box beside a pink birth certificate. Another photo caught Cameron at age 12, braces glinting as he posed with her son, both boys covered in mud from the lake behind her parents' old house. Then came report cards with gold stars, notes from PTA meetings she and Cameron had attended together like a married couple. But they hadn't been married. He had called it something better. Chosen family, he used to say, touching her shoulder in the kitchen, pouring wine, brushing her son's hair back like it was second nature. She gathered all the artifacts back into a neat pile. Her hand moved to the legal pad beside her, and she tore off a single sheet. No hesitation now. In sharp black ink she wrote, "History is not erased, it is ignored." Her handwriting looked strange, fierce, almost angry, but it was clean, undeniable. She folded the note once, placed it beneath the will, and exhaled a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Then she picked up her phone. She scrolled down her contact list until she found Millie, real estate plus notary, and hit call. It rang twice. Millie answered, voice rough with the charm of someone who didn't fake friendliness. "Well, look who's still alive. Been a minute." "I need a notary," Veronica said, her voice flat. "And a witness. Tonight. A beat." Then Millie whistled low. "Damn. We talkin' standard revocation or funeral fire?" Veronica stood up, eyes scanning the paperwork one last time. "Erase him," she said calmly, "but leave the outline. Let him know what he lost." Millie chuckled. "My kind of poetry. I'll be there by 8. The line went dead. Veronica didn't sit back down. Instead, she crossed the room to the liquor cabinet and poured herself 2 fingers of rye. Not wine, not tonight. She stared out the window into the slow dusk crawling across the neighborhood. Lights flickered on in other houses. Families moved around in silhouettes. A dog barked in the distance. Inside, she waited, for the sound of the doorbell, for the pen to hit paper, for something irreversible. But in the back of her mind, one question took shape like smoke rising off embers. If Cameron wasn't her future, why had he ever been in it at all? The next morning broke without ceremony. No birdsong, no sunburst. Just a low gray sky pressing down on the city like a held breath. Veronica pulled her coat tighter as she stepped out of the elevator and into the quiet corridor of the legal offices. The brass plaque outside read Tobias W. Garner, Escassis, Estate Planning and Probate. She'd once walked through this door full of hope. Now she walked through it with purpose. Toby's office still smelled faintly of cedar and lemon polish, like it had been dusted and then left untouched. He looked up as she entered, his wire-frame glasses slipping slightly down his nose. He smiled, but cautiously. The last time she'd been in this room, she'd left crying. "Veronica," he said, standing, "you look clear." She smiled softly. "Let's keep it that way." They didn't waste time. She laid the thick folder onto the table between them, opened it to a page already tabbed in red, and slid it toward him. Toby glanced at the signature line, then back at her. "You're revoking the 2015 testament," he asked, though the answer was obvious. "I'm rewriting the future," she replied, voice steady. "Everything goes into a living trust, controlled by Grace. She's the only one who gets direct access. My medical directives stay the same, but Cameron..." "Nothing." Toby blinked. "Nothing. No money, no property, no rights to contest the trust either." He leaned back in his chair, studying her. "You want a no-contest clause, then?" "Absolutely," she said without hesitation. "I want it ironclad. If he so much as whispers about challenging it, he loses any legal standing, permanently." Toby nodded slowly, fingers tapping the desk like a quiet drum roll. "And you mentioned a personal statement." "I brought a draft," she said, pulling a separate folded sheet from her purse. "Keep it formal but unmistakable. I want the language direct. No wiggle room. I need it to land like a door slamming shut." He scanned the document as she spoke, his eyes narrowing, then lifting briefly in silent surprise at the sharpness of her wording. "You sure you want this on record?" "Yes," she said. "That page is the one he'll remember." They worked for over an hour, tightening the language, updating the filings, cross-referencing with previous documents to make sure nothing slipped through the cracks. Veronica moved with surgical precision, her grief long since calcified into resolve. Toby had never seen her so still, so certain. By mid-afternoon, Millie arrived in her oversized blazer and red lipstick, coffee in one hand, notary seal in the other. "You know," she said as she set her things down, "some people break up with wine and Instagram quotes. You? You go full steel-toed legal warfare." Veronica raised an eyebrow. "Would you rather I embroidered a pillow about it?" Millie smirked. "Hell no." "This is more fun." The paperwork was signed, sealed, and initialed at every margin. Millie stamped each page with deliberate ceremony, the ka-thunk of the seal echoing like the toll of a final bell. When it was over, Toby leaned back, setting the freshly notarized stack aside. "It's done," he said, "legally and irrevocably." Veronica nodded once. She didn't smile, didn't cry, just rose from her chair and gathered her coat. As she reached the door, Toby called after her, "For what it's worth, you did the right thing." She paused for just a moment. "No, I did the necessary thing." Out in the hall, her phone buzzed. A new notification from social media. A Diane Rayner official just posted, "Family isn't about blood, it's about loyalty, and loyalty is earned." Beneath it, a photo of Diane and Cameron side by side at brunch. Champagne glasses mid-clink, grins wide enough to sell lies. Veronica's thumb hovered over the screen. She didn't like or comment. She just stared at the caption, the venom behind the sugar. Loyalty is earned. That part, Diane had finally gotten right. She locked her phone and walked toward the elevator, her heels clicking like a metronome counting down. She wasn't done, not even close. Because if Diane wanted loyalty to be earned, then it was time to show her how much betrayal cost. Rain tapped steadily against the windows, soft but insistent, like the sky was pacing outside. Inside the house, the only sounds were the hum of the scanner and the occasional click of a shutter as Grace captured another photo. Veronica sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by open boxes. Each one had been pulled down from the top shelves of closets or the shadowy corners of storage she hadn't touched in years. Cardboard flaps flared open like wounds. Inside, the artifacts of a life actually lived. Creases, fingerprints, torn edges, and all. She pulled out a faded Polaroid. Her son at age 5, cheeks red from the cold, smiling with all his baby teeth under a navy blue jacket 2 sizes too big. Veronica turned the photo over and picked up a black gel pen. Age 5. I worked nights to buy this jacket. He told me it looked cool like the rich kids. I pretended not to cry. She slipped the photo into the scanned pile and reached for another. Grace, seated across from her at the table, gently fed the last image into the flatbed scanner. "You're sure you don't want these printed into a book?" Grace asked, not for the first time. Veronica shook her head. "Not yet. Not for anyone else. These are just for us." Grace didn't push. She knew what they were really doing. This wasn't organization. This was witnessing. Veronica was archiving her version of the truth, a version that didn't flatter, didn't romanticize, and didn't leave space for Cameron's charm to slide in and smooth the rough edges. After a while, Veronica opened the next box. A stack of drawings sat on top, crayon-scribbled dragons and stick figures holding hands. A tiny V+6C had been scrawled on one in red marker. Cameron had drawn it years ago when they were still pretending nothing about their relationship had expiration dates. She didn't scan that one. She set it aside, face down. Grace caught the movement. "Some memories are better off as ghosts," she said quietly. Veronica nodded. By early evening, half the living room was blanketed in memories, sorted, labeled, and digitized. Grace was packing up her laptop and cords when Veronica's phone lit up on the kitchen counter. A message from Cameron. Just his name on screen made her breath tighten. She opened it. "Heard you've been going through the old stuff. Any chance I could get some of those pictures? The ones from the lake house, maybe the first school trip?" She read it twice. Nothing hostile, nothing dramatic. Just another glossy attempt at connection, polished like a business email. She typed back slowly, "I'm not ready to part with those." The response came fast. "You're still hung up on the past?" That one hit harder than it should have. She stared at it for a long beat, then turned the phone around and slid it across the counter toward Grace, who'd just returned from the bathroom drying her hands on her jeans. Grace read it and scoffed. "Of course he wants the pretty version," she said. "The filtered one. The one where he's the hero and you're the grateful witness." Veronica crossed her arms, the ache in her spine blooming from the hours on the floor. "I let him live in that version for too long." Grace leaned on the counter beside her. "And now?" "Now," Veronica said, "he doesn't get access." Her voice wasn't loud, but it landed like truth. She reached for one last photo, one she hadn't opened until now. A candid snapshot, her son asleep on the couch, covered in a blanket. Cameron beside him, hand resting on the boy's shoulder. The picture looked warm, almost familial. Until you remembered what came next. Veronica placed it on the table. She didn't scan it. She didn't label it. Instead, she picked up the scissors and in a clean, deliberate motion, sliced it straight down the middle, cutting Cameron out of the frame entirely. She placed the remaining half, just her son, into the archive box. The other half went into the trash. The woman behind the desk at the county recorder's office looked like she'd seen every flavor of desperation a person could bring to property records. Divorcees with trembling hands, children trying to make sense of what their parents left behind. Business partners turning on each other like dogs. But Veronica didn't bring desperation. She brought proof. "I just need a certified copy," she said, sliding her ID across the counter. The woman tapped at her keyboard, eyes flicking between the screen and Veronica's face. "Address?" Veronica recited it flatly. The woman typed, then paused. "It's clean," she said. "No co-owners, no encumbrances, no deeds of trust in anyone else's name." "I know," Veronica replied. "Just wanted it in writing." By the time she walked out with the official stamp in hand, a cool breeze had kicked up across the parking lot. The sky overhead looked like it might break. She stood beside her car for a long moment, paper in hand, watching the clouds fold in on themselves. Let it rain. Back at Toby's office, the lock paperwork was waiting. No transferability, no inheritance, no survivorship rights, he confirmed, reading each clause aloud like a death sentence. Even if you die tomorrow, it goes directly into the trust. Grace administers. Cameron's name never touches a single title. Veronica nodded once. Good, Toby hesitated. You sure you don't want him to have? I'm sure, she said, before he could finish. The pen hit the signature line like a hammer. That evening, Grace sat cross-legged on Veronica's couch, scrolling her phone while sipping a ginger beer. He's telling people it's his someday, she said suddenly, not looking up. Cameron. At Diane's thing last week, he said he was keeping an eye on the place, your place, like he was scouting square footage for a remodel. Veronica didn't flinch. It never was his. She rose from the armchair, crossed to the fireplace mantel, and adjusted a crooked photo, one of her son in front of the porch swing, barefoot, summer bright. Cameron had taken that picture, but he wasn't in it. He never would be. I just hadn't told him yet. The next morning came quiet. No warning. Veronica had just finished watering the orchids in the sunroom when the doorbell rang. She expected a package. It was Cameron. He smiled like he always did, wide, practiced, teeth perfectly visible. I was in the neighborhood, he said, lifting a coffee carrier with 2 lattes like peace offerings. Thought I'd drop by. Veronica stepped aside without speaking. Not a nod, not a word. He walked in like he belonged there. Some people made space. Cameron occupied it. He moved through the house in slow circles, commenting on things that didn't need commentary. You moved the bookshelf. I always liked the old spot. Still have that crack in the tile by the pantry, huh? Wow, this hallway feels smaller than I remember. She followed him, silently, arms crossed. Then he pulled out his phone, opened the measuring app. Just doing some mental planning, he said casually, aiming the phone toward the back den. Thinking maybe built-ins here, widen that doorway, maybe recess some lights in the hallway. Veronica tilted her head. Planning for what? He didn't hear the chill in her tone, or didn't care. I mean, you always said you didn't want the place to go to waste. I just figure if I end up here, I want to make it mine. Eventually. She said nothing, not a word. Not when he mentioned gutting the kitchen. Not when he asked about hardwood under the carpet. Not even when he paused in her late son's room, the room she hadn't let anyone step into in 3 years, and said, you know, this could be a perfect nursery someday. Big windows, lots of light. She watched him, quiet as snowfall. When he finally turned back toward her, waiting for approval or praise or some performative affection, she just smiled, small, polite, unreadable. That's a lot of ideas, she said softly, and nothing more. That night, after he left, the house felt cleaner somehow, quieter. She lit a candle, poured a half glass of wine, stared out the window until the moon broke through. Then she opened her phone and typed a single sentence in her notes app. He walks around inside the thing he thinks he owns, never realizing the walls are closing in. He didn't knock this time. The front door slammed open hard enough to rattle the keys hanging in the foyer. Veronica didn't flinch. She was seated at the dining table, calmly folding linen napkins into thirds, one by one. Sunlight spilled in through the tall windows, painting lines across the table, perfect geometry against rising chaos. Cameron charged in like a storm with a face. In his hand, a printout. Legal headers, her handwriting at the margins. He threw it down on the table between them. What the hell is this? She glanced at the paper, didn't touch it. Clarity. Cameron's voice jumped half an octave. You locked the deed. You cut me out of the trust. You sent Grace the administration rights behind my back? Her hand stayed perfectly still. It was never behind your back. You just weren't listening. He scoffed, loud, incredulous. You're doing this because of Diane, aren't you? Because she said something. She always hated how close we were. Veronica looked up slowly. I'm doing this because of you, Cameron. That stopped him, only for a beat. Then the pacing started. He always paced when control slipped from his fingers. 5 steps forward, pivot, 5 steps back. Like he could wear down the wood until someone changed their mind. You're rewriting history, he snapped. You're cutting me out of things we built together, of things I helped you survive. Veronica rose quietly, folding the last napkin and placing it atop the stack. She moved to the sideboard, opened the drawer, and began arranging silverware. She didn't look at him. You were never part of the foundation, she said. You were just good at decorating the illusion. His hand slammed flat against the table. That house was going to be mine. Now she turned. Grace stood just inside the hallway, silent, leaning against the wall. She hadn't said a word since he'd barged in, but her presence crackled like static. Cameron noticed her now, eyes narrowing. She's in on this too. Grace didn't move. She's watching, that's all. Cameron's voice dipped low, tight with something uglier. Of course she is, always in the wings, waiting for you to hand her what we had. Veronica walked back toward him, slowly, measured. You don't get to rewrite this as a betrayal, she said. You leveraged my grief. You hollowed out my trust and filled it with performance. You earned your way into the will, then spent the rest of your time acting like it was inevitable. His jaw clenched. And now that it's gone, she added, you're not mourning the relationship. You're mourning the loss of access. You think you're better than this, he snapped. You think cutting people out makes you strong? Veronica stepped in close, closer than she had in months. Her voice dropped. No, she said, but I know it makes me free. He stared at her, chest rising like he wanted to scream, to throw something, to make her flinch. But she didn't. And for the first time in his life, he had no idea what to say next. The silence stretched, thick and humming. Cameron glanced toward Grace, then the printout on the table, then Veronica, still, certain, immovable. When he finally turned toward the door, his movements were sharp, stiff. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't slam the door. He just left. Grace waited 5 whole seconds before stepping into the room. Well, she said, exhaling. That was new. Veronica let her body relax a little, like an iron had finally been lifted from her back. He's never left in silence before, she murmured. Grace picked up the printout he'd dropped and folded it neatly. Maybe it's because he finally realized the performance was over. Veronica poured herself a glass of water and stared out the window. He didn't show up for the house, she said quietly. He showed up to take his mask back. Grace tilted her head, but he left it here. Veronica nodded once, her eyes never leaving the glass in her hand. Good, she whispered. Now we can finally see who he really is. The cursor blinked at the end of the last sentence, waiting. It wasn't flashing impatiently. It pulsed, steady, as if encouraging her to hit send. Veronica read through the essay again, not for grammar this time, but for gut. The title sat bold and unapologetic at the top of the document. Inheritance isn't entitlement. I think it's sharp, Grace said from across the room, holding a red pen and a mug of chamomile tea she hadn't touched in 20 minutes. Lean, unapologetic. You sure you want to submit it with your name on it, though? Veronica turned her chair slightly, the light from the late morning sun catching the side of her face. I want them to know it's from me. Not guess, not speculate, no. Grace nodded slowly and stood, crossing the room to place the marked-up draft next to the laptop. Then take out that last softening line about grief. Let it end on your terms. Veronica made the edit, deleted the sentence, reread the final paragraph. No one is owed your legacy simply because they watched you build it. The people who show up only to measure the walls are the first ones who will gut the house after you're gone. Protect your name, protect your peace. Inheritance is not entitlement, it's trust. And trust must be earned. She clicked submit. The op-ed was published in the Marion County Gazette the next morning. wedged between a school board update and a piece on downtown parking enforcement. Nothing flashy, just words, just hers. By that evening, her inbox had tripled in unread messages. Some from old neighbors, a few from teachers she hadn't seen in years, dozens from strangers. Thank you for putting into words what so many of us feel. You said what I couldn't say to my own daughter. This made me cry, and then made me call my lawyer. The essay was shared, reshared, screen captured and screenshotted until it landed on Facebook pages with profile names like Nana Knows Best and Real Talk After 60. The comments were endless, some praising her, some picking apart the subtext, and a few, inevitably, accusing her of being bitter. Toby called the next afternoon. I read your little manifesto, he said. Dry, but not unkind. Wasn't supposed to be legal language, Veronica replied, holding the phone between her shoulder and ear while drying a pan. No, Toby agreed, but it was effective. Every client over 55 who came in today mentioned it. You started a mini revolution, you know that? She smiled. Good, let it spread. But not everyone was clapping. 3 days after publication, Diane posted a statement to her social media accounts. A pale pink background with her signature floral logo in the corner. Centered white text. Sometimes people cry for help in the loudest ways. It's up to us to respond with compassion, not criticism. Family is still family, even when they lash out. Underneath, a caption. To anyone hurting right now, I see you. Love doesn't keep score. Shat forgive anyway. Kaktu, chosen family. Grace threw her phone across the couch. You've got to be kidding me. Veronica didn't even blink. She just walked to the fridge, pulled out a lemon, and began slicing it with perfect meditative care. She's trying to frame the truth as trauma, Grace muttered. Make it look like you're the unstable one. Let her try, Veronica said calmly. She dropped the lemon into a pitcher of water and stirred. Her voice, when she spoke again, was almost too soft to hear. Help was offered. Disrespect was chosen. Grace looked up at her, really looked at her. You should make that your next title, but Veronica's eyes were on the window now, watching the wind push against the trees lining the street. She wants attention, Veronica said. She wants to reframe me as a tantrum. She turned back to Grace, her gaze razor sharp. Then I'll give her silence so loud it shatters her version. The courthouse smelled faintly of varnished wood and overbrewed coffee. Its marble floors swallowed footsteps, making every arrival feel like a performance. Veronica sat in the second row of the small probate courtroom, her hands folded neatly in her lap, a thin black binder at her feet. She dressed in muted gray, hair pinned back, no jewelry, invisible on purpose. At the front of the room, Cameron's attorney, a tall man with a practiced voice built for sound bites, adjusted his cufflinks as he rose. His client sat behind him, jaw set, suit slightly too crisp, eyes flicking toward Veronica like he wanted her to blink first. Your Honor, the attorney began, we contend that Ms. Delaney's recent estate documents are the product of manipulation, undue influence, and mental instability following the tragic loss of her son. We believe the court must consider whether her decision-making capacity was compromised at the time of execution. He spoke like someone trying to weave a net with threads too thin to hold. Every few sentences, Cameron shifted in his seat, whispering something, eyes darting toward the bench. Toby didn't rush. When his turn came, he rose slowly, buttoning his navy jacket with a soft click of the clasp. His voice was even, unshowy, meant for judges, not headlines. Your Honor, the revisions were drafted and signed across a documented timeline spanning 4 months. Cognitive evaluations were conducted by independent professionals, filed and dated. Notary records are attached as Exhibits A through D. There is no credible evidence of manipulation, and Ms. Delaney's mental acuity is attested to by 2 separate physicians. He laid out the binder of evidence with a precision Veronica recognized, each page tabbed, each date highlighted. She hadn't had to say a single word to get here. She wouldn't say one now. The judge, an older woman with iron gray hair coiled in a bun, flipped through the exhibits without expression. Her pen tapped once against the bench. "Any witnesses?" she asked. Toby gestured. "Yes, Your Honor, Ms. Millie Carver." Millie approached the stand in her blazer, red lipstick bright as a warning flare. She raised her hand for the oath and then sat, crossing one ankle over the other. "State your involvement," the judge said. "I notarized every signature personally," Millie replied, voice crisp. Ms. Delaney read each clause aloud before signing. No hesitation, no coercion. "And as an additional safeguard, I arranged for a third-party witness on the final revision. Every page initialed, every seal stamped in my presence. This isn't hearsay. This is my work." The opposing attorney stood. "Ms. Carver, you're a friend of Ms. Delaney, aren't you?" Millie tilted her head. "I'm also a professional, and my stamp doesn't bend for friendship." A murmur rippled through the small gallery. Even the bailiff allowed himself the ghost of a smirk. Cameron shifted again, fidgeting now. His lawyer leaned down to whisper, but Cameron's eyes were locked on Veronica, calm, unmoving, a figure he could no longer provoke. The judge closed the binder, leaned back in her chair, and let a long moment pass before speaking. "This court finds no credible basis for reversal. The decedent's property rights are secure under the executed documents. Further attempts to challenge will be considered frivolous and sanctioned accordingly. The record of this proceeding will be sealed to prevent future misuse." The gavel fell with a dry, final crack. Cameron's attorney exhaled sharply. "Your Honor," he began, but the judge was already rising, robe sweeping. "We're adjourned." Cameron stood slowly, as though the air had thickened around him. For once, no smile, no charm, no spin. Just a man realizing the performance had ended, and the curtain wasn't coming back up. Veronica remained seated until the room emptied. Toby gathered his papers. Millie straightened her blazer. Grace squeezed her shoulder from behind. Still she didn't stand, didn't speak. She'd built her silence like a fortress. Now it held. Cameron paused at the aisle, as if he might say something, but no words came. He turned and left without looking back. When the doors closed, the courtroom fell utterly still. Veronica exhaled through her nose, a slow release. Then, almost absently, she reached into her bag and pulled out a small leather notebook. On its first blank page, she wrote, in ink, "Today was the first time he lost something and couldn't make it my fault." She closed it, slipped it back into her bag, and rose, ready for whatever came next. The fallout didn't hit like a bomb. It moved like a shadow, slow, steady, suffocating. It began with a phone call Cameron didn't see coming. His firm's managing partner left a message on a Thursday morning. "Let's meet Monday. Need to go over a few things that have come up." That was corporate speak for blood in the water. Cameron called back immediately, but the assistant said the partner was in back-to-backs for the rest of the day. And the next. Cameron's voice cracked as he left a second message, then a third, but no one returned them. What he didn't know, what Veronica did, was that a freelance journalist had filed a routine docket search for local estate disputes. The court challenge was sealed, but the existence of it, still public. Just enough for gossip to sprout teeth, especially when the name Cameron Rayner appeared next to phrases like disputed will, mental instability claim, and revoked beneficiary. His firm prided itself on community integrity. Cameron's picture had once hung in the front lobby, featured on the firm's Diversity and Mentorship Initiative banner. By Friday afternoon, it had been quietly replaced. Grace didn't mean to overhear. She'd dropped off soup for Veronica and was heading back to her car when she heard the argument through Diane's half-cracked kitchen window. "You told me this wouldn't blow back on me," Cameron's voice hissed. "You said she wouldn't push this far." "She wasn't supposed to," Diane snapped. "Well, now the firm thinks I'm some manipulative, gold-digging sociopath with boundary issues." Maybe don't act like one then. Silence, then Cameron again, lower this time. I can't fix this. That sentence didn't land like an admission. It landed like surrender. Grace backed away from the window before they saw her. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. But something settled inside her. Something final. That weekend, Veronica sat at the kitchen table, laptop open, coffee cooling beside her. She clicked confirm transfer on a transaction titled, To Grace Ellis Education Trust, Supplemental Allocation, $75,000. The trust was already funded. This was extra, quiet security, a signal. She texted Grace only 2 words, check email. Grace's reply came 3 minutes later. You didn't have to do that. Exactly why I did. On Tuesday, Toby emailed confirmation. The house had officially been moved into the Grace Ellis Living Trust. Veronica reread the digital deed once, then again, then closed her laptop gently. She stood in the foyer and looked around the house, really looked at it. At the worn spots on the banister. At the crooked frame she'd never bothered to straighten. At the couch that had held every version of her grief. Now it belonged to no one who didn't deserve it. Cameron's fingers would never touch its keys again. By midweek, the ripple had become a tide. Cameron noticed it first in the silence. Texts went unanswered. Invites dried up. A lunch with his old college friends was rescheduled indefinitely. One by one, his circles of influence began to shrink. He could feel the air changing around him, colder, tighter. People weren't angry, they were uncomfortable, the kind of discomfort that makes reputations rot slowly. Veronica said nothing publicly. She didn't need to. Consequences did the talking. Diane posted once more, a photo of a sunrise over Lake Monroe with the caption, "Sometimes space is the only way to make peace." Grace saw it first. She left town, she said, showing Veronica the post. Packed up yesterday, said she needed 2 weeks to clear her head. Veronica stirred her tea. Translation: she doesn't want to be seen standing next to a sinking ship. Grace tilted her head. Do you think she regrets it? Veronica looked up. I think she regrets being seen losing. That night, Cameron sat alone on his couch, drink in hand, scrolling through contacts that suddenly felt unfamiliar. One name, though, still glowed on his screen. Veronica Delaney. He hovered over it, thumb twitching, but something in him knew. He couldn't reach her now, not because she was gone, but because he was irrelevant. And somewhere, quietly, the part of him that still believed he could charm his way back finally stopped believing. The knock came just after dusk. Veronica was trimming dead leaves from her orchid in the sunroom, the last of the day's golden light slanting across the floor. She didn't move at first. Let it sit. Let the air hold its breath. The knock came again, firmer this time, but not angry, not yet. She wiped her hands, walked through the hall, and opened the door without checking the peephole. Cameron stood there, holding a plain white envelope. He looked smaller than she remembered. Not physically. Something in the way his shoulders didn't square anymore. Something in the way his jaw didn't set like it used to. I'm not here to talk, he said, voice even but subdued. Just here to leave this. He held it out. She didn't take it at first. She looked at the envelope instead. Unmarked, sealed, edges pressed so tightly it looked machine-made. He cleared his throat. It's not a plea, not some manipulation. It's everything I should have said. Back then, still, she didn't move. I'm not asking for anything, he added quickly. Just do with it what you want. Veronica finally reached out and took it. Good night, Cameron. He hesitated like he might say more, might ruin the moment by trying to reclaim it. But something stopped him. He turned and walked down the front steps, hands in his pockets, disappearing into the soft indigo of the evening. She closed the door. The envelope sat on the kitchen counter while she made tea. Then she moved it to the dining table when she set the mug down. Later, When she went to tidy the living room, she picked it up again, carefully like it might shatter, and brought it with her. Finally, she opened the bottom drawer of the antique credenza beside the fireplace and placed it inside, face down, then shut the drawer. The next afternoon, Grace found her sitting on the back porch, shelling sugar snap peas into a ceramic bowl. She leaned against the railing, sunglasses perched on her head. "I saw his car out front yesterday," she said, tone neutral. "Did he try something?" Veronica shook her head. "He left a letter." Grace paused. "What kind of letter?" "I didn't open it." "You mean not yet?" "No," Veronica said simply. "Not ever." Grace stepped down and sat beside her on the porch swing. "Don't you want to know what's in it?" "I do," Veronica said, "but not enough to let him narrate anything ever again." She dropped another pea into the bowl with a quiet plink. "I already know what's in there. Regret. Justification dressed up as apology. Maybe a half-truth or two framed as some kind of revelation." Grace studied her. "You don't think he meant it?" "I think he meant to be seen trying." The silence between them stretched, companionable this time, the kind that doesn't demand filling. Eventually, Grace reached for a handful of pods and started shelling alongside her. "It's weird, isn't it? How people think closure is something they get to give you." Veronica smiled faintly. "Closure's something you build, quietly, when no one's looking." Later that night, when the wind picked up and the house settled into its creaks and sighs, Veronica walked over to the credenza. She opened the drawer. The envelope was still there, clean, untouched. She closed the drawer again without even glancing at it. The letter didn't haunt her, but the fact that he thought it might. That was the last echo of who he used to be. And now, even that was quiet. The lecture hall smelled faintly of dry erase markers and old carpet, a combination every college student would someday associate with half-formed dreams and barely met deadlines. Veronica hadn't been on a campus in over a decade, but the energy was the same. Buzzy, restless, half-caffeinated minds waiting to be impressed or disarmed. She stood just behind the podium, watching the professor finish his brief introduction. Her name appeared on the digital screen behind him. Veronica Delaney, guest speaker, family law, ethics, and real-world consequences. "I want to thank Ms. Delaney for joining us," the professor said, stepping aside. "You've likely seen her op-ed in the Gazette or heard the buzz from our law library. Her story's being added to next semester's course packet as a case study in estate ethics and moral clarity in the absence of legal obligation." There was polite applause. Veronica stepped forward. She didn't need her notes. She never had. "Most people assume estate planning is about money," she began, "but what no one prepares you for is the emotion. How often it's not about what's left behind, but who believes they're owed what you've built." She let the silence settle. "In my case," she continued, "the mistake wasn't who I trusted. It was how long I let them feel entitled to my future, simply because they were present in my past." A few students stopped typing, lifting their eyes from laptops. It was subtle, but she felt the shift. They were listening now, really listening. "Legal protections are one thing," Veronica said, "but emotional clarity, that's something the law can't file for you. You have to earn it the hard way." In the back row, Grace sat with her hands clasped, trying, failing, not to cry. She'd heard every version of this story, helped write the final draft of it with Veronica in long silences and short surgical choices. But something about hearing it here, in this room full of 20-somethings who hadn't yet been burned the way they had, it hit her deeper than she expected. Afterward, the floor opened for questions. A student raised her hand. "How did you stay so calm during the court challenge? You never spoke, never released a public statement." Veronica smiled, small and soft. "Because I stopped expecting him to love me the way I deserved." That sentence stilled the room. She could feel the truth of it landing across every row, some visibly struck, others blinking faster than usual. Maybe not all of them had experienced it yet, but one day they would, and they'd remember this. Another hand went up. A young man with a podcast mic clipped to his hoodie. Would you be open to a recorded interview? I think a lot of people would benefit from hearing this outside the classroom. Veronica glanced toward Grace, who gave the slightest nod, proud, supportive, teary-eyed still. I might, she replied, but I'd want to tell it on my terms, not as a scandal, not as some inspirational wrap-up. Just, truthfully, the student nodded. That's the whole point. That night back home, Veronica stood in her kitchen peeling a blood orange, fingers stained with red. Grace leaned in the doorway, arms crossed. "You were incredible," she said softly. Veronica didn't look up. It felt strange, telling it like a story, like something with chapters instead of bruises. But they needed to hear it, Grace said. They needed to see that silence can be strength. That calm doesn't mean surrender. Veronica looked up then. "Do you think he read the op-ed again? Do you think he watched the recording?" Grace shrugged. "Maybe, but it doesn't matter anymore, does it?" Veronica smiled faintly. "No," she said. "It doesn't." She dropped the orange peel into the compost bin, washed her hands, and dried them with the soft towel Grace had given her last Christmas, embroidered with one word, unbothered. The next morning, she'd reply to the student's podcast request, but tonight she let herself rest. She had nothing left to prove. The final paperwork arrived in a thick white envelope delivered by certified mail. Veronica signed for it in the foyer, pen steady, breath even. She didn't open it immediately, just tucked it beneath her arm and carried it into the kitchen, where Grace was stirring butternut squash soup on the stove. "That the final deed packet?" Grace asked without turning. Veronica nodded. "It's yours now, all of it." Grace went still. "Really?" "It always was. I just finally made the paperwork catch up to the truth." She pulled a ceramic bowl from the cabinet and set it on the table. The envelope followed, its weight subtle but irreversible. Later, when they sat down together, Veronica opened the packet and walked Grace through it page by page. The Grace Ellis Living Trust now held full, titled Ownership of the House. The college tuition account had been merged with an arts grant clause Veronica had created quietly months ago, one that could fund any project Grace dreamed up after graduation. A safety net and a springboard in one. "Medical power of attorney, should anything ever happen to me," Veronica said calmly, tapping the highlighted section. "And here's the part I want you to remember most." She slid over the last page, not a legal clause, not a formula, just a single typed paragraph. "Love is earned, not assumed. This trust is not a repayment. It's not a reward. It's a recognition. You showed up, you stayed, you didn't perform, you lived it. And now you are the legacy." Grace blinked, then reached up to wipe her eyes with the sleeve of her hoodie. "I don't know what to say." Veronica smiled gently. "You don't have to say anything. You already did." Elsewhere, in an office suite with windows that hadn't been cleaned since the last round of budget cuts, Cameron sat scrolling through the county website on his phone. He almost missed it at first. The notice was tucked inside a public transfer log under routine filings. No big headline, no press release. Just a cold, bureaucratic line of type. Property deed transfer, 1104 Willowbean Road. Grace Ellis Trust, sole owner. He stared at the screen, thumb hovering over the words like they might rearrange themselves if he held still long enough. There had been no calls, no warnings, no room left for negotiation, not even the courtesy of a final denial. She had erased him with silence. He sat back slowly, the hum of the HVAC too loud in the stillness. For the first time, it occurred to him that every version of the future he'd pictured had one thing in common. Veronica still cared enough to react. She didn't. And that was what killed him. That night, Veronica's phone buzzed once, one new message. "Cameron, I never should have said it. No punctuation, no clarification. Just a single brittle sentence that could have applied to 100 moments. 1,000 wounds. It didn't matter which one he meant." She stared at the screen for 5 full seconds. then locked it, set the phone face down on the nightstand, and returned to her book. She didn't need to ask what he meant. She knew. The insult that cut too deep, the silence he weaponized. The words he used like keys to doors he never had the right to enter. The apology came too late, and it asked for too little. She'd already stopped waiting for it. Outside, the wind bent through the trees with a sound like distant waves. Inside, the house was still, peaceful. Veronica rose, made her way to the fireplace, and straightened the framed trust document that now hung above it. A symbol, not of wealth, but of choice. She touched the edge of the frame gently, then turned out the lights. Because forgiveness didn't always wear a white flag. Sometimes it wore inheritance, and it left behind the ones who mistook proximity for permanence. The conference table in Toby's office was nearly silent. Only the sound of rustling paper and the gentle click of Veronica's pen tapping the legal pad in front of her. Across from her, Millie leaned back in her chair, half lenses perched low on her nose, reading through the revised will for the third time. No sentimental fluff, she muttered. No vague phrasing. Just surgical, final, and lethal in all the best ways. She looked up. This thing is airtight and ice cold. Veronica didn't flinch. It's not about cold, it's about clean. Millie smirked. Tomato, tomato. Toby cleared his throat gently, ever the middleman between efficiency and empathy. You're removing Cameron entirely. No backup beneficiary, no medical agent, no digital executor? Yes, Veronica said. And you're adding a disinheritance clause? This line here? He asked, pointing. Veronica leaned forward and reread it. Any person who knowingly supported, advised, or participated in legal challenges to my estate, regardless of familial title, shall be disqualified from all forms of inheritance, access, or future claim. I want it on record, she said. It wasn't just him. Diane tried to shape the narrative. Grease palms, feed whispers. They thought their proximity made them permanent. Millie whistled softly. Now they're just a cautionary tale. Veronica initialed the margin. Toby flipped to the final signature page, laid it flat, and passed her the pen. She signed slowly, carefully. No rush, no hesitation. When she was done, she placed the pen down like she'd just sealed the last chapter of a very long book. Back at the house, Grace had already set up the scanner on the dining room table. Manila folders were stacked beside her, tabs labeled in her precise handwriting. Trust, will, archive, emergency. Veronica handed over the newly notarized will. Scan every page, encrypt the final copy. Upload it to 3 separate cloud locations and password protect the backup. Grace arched an eyebrow. Done. Already started on the redundancy log. 2. Veronica sat across from her. Do one more thing. Name it. Double-check that Cameron's name doesn't show up in the metadata. I don't want him haunting even the margins. Grace nodded, eyes already scanning the file headers. Consider it exercised. A week later, an embossed envelope arrived from the Marion County Law Society, requesting Veronica to return as a guest speaker. This time, not for a classroom, but for their professional symposium on legacy clarity in modern estate ethics. She read the invitation while sitting at the kitchen table, a cup of black coffee cooling beside her. Grace peeked over her shoulder. You going? Veronica shook her head. No need. You sure? It's a room full of lawyers asking you how to be decisive. You could charge for that. Veronica didn't smile, but her eyes crinkled at the corners. Instead of RSVPing, she pulled out a sheet of thick stationery. No letterhead, no stamp. Just a black pen and her own words. She wrote, be precise, be quiet, be done. She folded it once, sealed it in a plain envelope, and mailed it the next day. That night, as the wind pushed softly through the trees and dusk filtered into a lavender haze, Grace joined Veronica on the porch. Everything's archived, she said. 3 cloud backups, 2 external drives, 1 sealed copy in the safety deposit box. We're locked tighter than NASA. Veronica nodded. Good. Grace hesitated. You feel finished? Veronica didn't answer immediately. She watched the wind dance across the grass, watched the porch light blink on. Not finished, she said finally. But I've removed the hands that never should have held anything. Grace leaned back, folding her arms across her chest. You're kind of terrifying, you know. Veronica tilted her head. Only to the ones who thought I wouldn't follow through. Just then, a car passed on the distant road, slow, headlights dim. Neither of them looked. Inside, the house remained quiet. No drafts, no ghosts, only legacy, and not the kind someone could contest. It was late, close to midnight, when Grace found the envelope tucked inside the top drawer of her desk, slipped between tax documents and a half-finished grant proposal. Her name was written across the front in Veronica's handwriting. No last name, no return address, just Grace in black ink, steady, slanted, unmistakably hers. She sat down slowly, folding her legs beneath her in the overstuffed reading chair beside the window. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak in the hardwood. Old bones settling for the night, Grace hesitated, fingers brushing the edge of the flap. Then she opened it. Inside was no formal letter, no legal jargon, just a folded set of pages, some written in pen, some typed. At the top of the first, for when it's time to remember, not to react. She read in silence, eyes scanning the stories that unfolded in uneven paragraphs. The day we tried to make brownies and forgot the eggs. We blamed the recipe. We both knew it was us. You used to hum when you painted. You still do. When you lost that scholarship and cried on the porch, I didn't know how to fix it, so I just sat beside you until you stopped shaking. You didn't need saving. You just needed not to be alone. Grace turned the page, and tucked inside was a smaller envelope, no note, just a tiny brass key taped to the back with a strip of washi tape patterned with tiny lavender sprigs. Her heart thudded once. She knew what it was for. The cedar box had always been there, stored under Veronica's bed. It wasn't locked until recently. Grace had asked once. Veronica just smiled and said, "Some things need time." She carried the box to the center of the room and knelt beside it. The key slid in smoothly, turned with a soft click. The scent of cedar and old paper met her first, then the subtle sweetness of dried lavender. Inside, a stack of photographs, letters, a folded apron, and a small hardcover journal worn at the edges. She reached for the top photo, slightly bent from years of storage. It was them, baking cookies. Veronica in a flour-dusted sweater, her arm wrapped loosely around a younger Grace, who held up a crooked tray of misshapen chocolate chips like it was a trophy. Both of them smiling, real, full smiles. No one else in the frame. There was no note on the back. It didn't need one. Grace held the frame in her hands for a long time, her throat tightening. She didn't hear Veronica enter. "Found it," Veronica said softly from the doorway. Grace turned, eyes glassy but voice steady. "This is better than the trust paperwork." Veronica smiled, stepping closer, barefoot and calm. "It's older, too. The trust came after. That moment was when I knew." "Knew what?" "That you'd never just be part of the house," Veronica said. "You were the home." Grace set the frame carefully on the edge of the bed and sat down beside it. Her hand went to her necklace, a small ceramic pendant Veronica had given her after the court win. She looked up. "I'm never letting him near this house again." Veronica met her gaze without hesitation. "You won't have to." A breeze stirred the curtain behind them. Somewhere outside, a dog barked once, then quieted. Inside, the weight of years, the hard kind, the ones with teeth, settled into something warmer. They didn't speak again that night. They didn't need to. Some letters were meant to be opened. Others were meant to be lived. And this house, this life, had finally chosen its keeper. The subject line read, "End of year request. Consider supporting the Rayner Foundation." Veronica hovered over it just long enough to read the preview text. You've always believed in second chances. She didn't open it. She didn't need to. Her finger slid to the trash icon. Click, deleted, gone. Not even a moment's pause for the familiar name beneath the signature. Diane Rayner, co-founder. Outside, the sun was just beginning to warm the porch tiles. Inside, the house breathed like it finally trusted itself again. Quiet, fragrant, soft at the edges. A diffuser released hints of rosemary and orange blossom. The kettle on the stove hissed gently, announcing its readiness without demand. Veronica poured 2 cups of tea, one for herself, one for Grace, and brought them into the sunroom. Grace was curled into the corner chair, sketchbook in her lap, pencil moving in slow, unhurried circles. Mint or chamomile? Veronica asked. Grace reached without looking. Surprise me. Veronica handed her the chamomile, settling across from her on the cushioned bench. No words for a while. Just the sound of birds outside, the gentle clink of ceramic, the way steam curled like ribbon into the air. After a few minutes, Grace closed her sketchbook and set it on the ottoman. I've been thinking, she said. That always ends well, Veronica replied, smiling into her mug. Grace picked up a small leather-bound journal from beside the chair. It had been a gift. Christmas, maybe 3 years ago, still mostly blank. You should keep writing, she said, holding it out. The story's not over. Veronica looked at it for a long moment, then took it. Her fingers brushed the spine, tracing the stitched edge. Feels like the big parts are done. Grace shook her head. Maybe, but the quiet parts matter too. What comes after the battle? How you live when no one's watching. That's the part no one teaches us. Veronica nodded. Then maybe that's the part all right. They sat in companionable silence until the front gate clicked open and the sound of Millie's voice floated in from the walkway. Hope you're decent. I brought fruit and a fresh batch of zero tolerance. Grace laughed and opened the door. Millie swept in with her usual flair, sun hat, hoop earrings, and a brown paper sack full of ripe figs and goat cheese from the co-op. She kissed Veronica on the cheek, dropped the bag on the kitchen counter, and held up a bottle of non-alcoholic elderflower cordial like a trophy. Let's toast to being unwritten by men, she said. Veronica raised her glass first. They clinked. Later, after lunch, when the sun had dipped just low enough to turn the living room honey-colored, Veronica sat at the table and pulled out the last document Toby had couriered over. A legacy letter, not legally required, but meaningful. A personal epilogue, her chance to tell the story behind the decisions. She flipped to the final page. The space for her signature waited in silence. She didn't rush. She picked up her pen, signed her name with a slow, steady flourish, then drew a line underneath. Solid. Final. Grace watched from the hallway, hands still stained with fig juice, eyes soft. And in that moment, there was no weight left. No fear that someone might undo it all with charm or force or proximity. It was done. Later that night, Veronica sat on the porch again, journal in her lap, pen in hand, the first page still blank. She let it sit for a while, then wrote slowly. He pointed at his stepmother and said, "She raised me better than you ever could, Wissy." Then she paused, smiled, and wrote the last line like it had been waiting all along. So I raised a pen and took back everything he expected.